Right, gosh, a minute seems like an awfully long time when you're watching the clock go around. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Fenello, Executive Director of EVCOM, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar, Zero to Hero. This is part of a series of events that HBAA and EVCOM have collaborated on in the last year. Through this past year, collaboration has enjoyed a resurgence as people have found partners to work with to help them navigate these murky waters. What has also been evident is the need for ongoing mental health support. And during this Mental Health Awareness Week, and as industry starts to reopen further, we're delighted to welcome a panel who will share their insights into how to support teams through this transition and what plans can be put in place moving forward. I'd like to introduce our facilitator for the day, who's Maher from Boulevard Events and also chair of Eventwell. And our panelists are Flint, Fast Forward 15 mentor, Jenna Carter from Lime Venue Portfolio, Paul Stoddart from CWT, and Charlotte Gentry from Pure Comms Group and is also the EVCOM board chair. Before I hand you over to Mark, I would just like to suggest that if you have any questions, you put them in the chat box and Mark and the panel will hopefully get to those. And also just a reminder that these sessions are recorded and they'll be made available through our websites as of tomorrow afternoon, where they can be reviewed, and hopefully there'll be some resources and some additional help there as well. We should go on till about 3:45, but sometimes skip over a bit if the questions are coming in. But with that, I'm going to hand you over to Mark and he will get the conversation started. Mark.
Thanks so much, Claire. And also, congratulations to you and to your team and your collaborators for organising this. I think it's such an important topic to keep at the forefront, especially at the moment. So really well done. So the topic today is Zero to Hero. Obviously, as people of the events industry, we're very used to going from periods of low expectation and pressure to very high expectation and pressure. And I think perhaps this is the biggest example in living memory of a time where we've gone through a period of quite low expectation and pressure, and we're about on the cusp of going back to what we as event profs know as normality. The first question I wanted to ask, and I think I'll come to you, Jenna, on this one, if that's all right to start with, is there anything that you've put into place for your teams and for your customers throughout the pandemic that have worked quite well to support them with their mental health, that's worked so well that you're going to sort of continue that as we go back to normality?
Yeah, I suppose there's been quite a lot of initiatives that we've been doing that we probably wouldn't have done in a normal world. And I would say probably the team and the venues that we represent haven't, well, we've had really good communication in the past, but actually we speak to each other on an almost daily or weekly basis now, which perhaps wouldn't have happened before. So I think the first thing that's come out of it, I suppose, is communication. But we've put certain things in place, I suppose, to support our immediate team as well as our venues. So the first thing, and I think this is a really good one, and I try to keep to it as much as possible, is to limit the amount of time we're doing this interaction on the screen all the time. So we've introduced Teams free hours, where at least once a day we're trying to have an hour at least off the screen, where we can go take a walk if possible, but just to get away from the screen, because obviously that in itself doesn't really help mental health when we're just sitting here all day doing that. And then the other thing that we really, I suppose, got involved with and really enjoyed is we've tried to do more walking, so encouraging one another to get out and about. And last month it was obviously Stress Awareness Month. We tried to walk the distance of the equivalent of our 80 venues, and actually we did do it, but it gave us a target and something to talk about and communicate about, as well as being good for kind of our physical health, I suppose. It was more about the mental well-being. So those are two things that we've put in place, and two things that we're going to try and continue, I would say, in some format as we come out of this.
That's great. It's quite a creative thing on the marketing side to do as well. It must have been quite hard to think of things to talk about during the pandemic. So, you know.
Well, that's my job, so I'd be in trouble if we didn't. But yeah, it's been great to be able to come up with different ideas and bounce them off one another.
Awesome, well done, Jen. Charlotte, is there anything you'd like to add on that? You obviously manage quite a big team as well.
Yeah, so. I mean, I think the thing to really mention here is that I think mental health and how people feel engaged is a very, very personal and individualized thing. And so there isn't a one size fits all approach. And so, of course, yes, we've done what we can to minimize the stressful elements of the pandemic. But I think there's stress that's been beyond our control with certain members of the team, which is, you know, around, oh God, you know, job security, the industry failing to, you know, I say the industry failing, the industry's done very, very well, but, you know, we've had a terribly tough time over the last 15 months or so, and people watching their colleagues losing their jobs, even though they haven't lost their jobs, you know, so I think it's been really, really tough, and trying to keep people buoyant. We've landed on sending people little individual things to perk up their week or their day, actually. So we've ended up by, even if it's muffins or a big bunch of flowers, if they've done a really good piece of work. It's trying to keep people sort of engaged and pepped up, really, more than anything else, because, you know, people are working in very, very different conditions to each other. So, you know, I've got members of the team who are in their mid-20s who are living in flat shares, you know, where working conditions are really not very easy at all, and they are desperate to be in the office. So at any given opportunity they've been in our office rather than having to work from home. Whereas other people who've got small kids, they've got different challenges, and so, you know, trying to have a conversation with them at the end of the day is not very easy because it's tea time and whatever. So it's flexibility and communication that is really, really key.
It's interesting, the general sort of topics of how you look after your team, you know, communication and flexibility stay the same, but I guess the tactics on how you deliver those have had to change during the pandemic. It leads me nicely on to the next question, actually, which, Paul, I'll come to you for this one, if that's all right. Is there, like, do you feel that the needs of your teams and your customers have changed now? And if so, how do you what plans do you have to sort of facilitate that going forward?
Yeah, thanks. I think everything's changing, isn't it, at the moment, in our world. And I think what Charlotte said earlier about treating everybody as an individual and being massively flexible is got to be a watchword for everybody in approaching how we move forward. I think one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, we're looking at a date when we're going to move quite, you know, a large number of people back from a working from home situation to working in an office environment for the first time in a year or more for most people, because we're not actually open at the moment. We're not planning to open, you know, within the next 3 months, say. So, you know, it could well be that we don't open until Q4. By which time we're going to have a really interesting mix, aren't we? You know, we're going to have, as Charlotte said, some kind of older people who are really comfortable working from home, younger people who have got really inappropriate conditions, who are desperate to get back into the office. But also, you're going to have people who have been on mat leave, who are coming back for the first time. You've got a bunch of people who've started with the organisation. So I think the idea of trying to treating everybody as a new starter is probably a good way to approach the task. And I think, you know, first and foremost, we've got to reassure everybody that we've got their health and safety and well-being at the forefront of all of the decision making that's taking place in the organisation about when we're going to start working again in the office, what the new protocols are going to be in the office, who we're going to allow in the office. You know, formally, we've had a kind of a mentality that, you know, all are welcome, but, you know, is everybody welcome? Do we want lots and lots of supply meetings in offices on a daily basis, which is kind of what we had in the past? Are we what processes are we going to put in place to make sure that anybody, whether it's a client or a business partner coming into the office, to make sure that they've gone through the necessary protocols to ensure that our staff are protected. You know, all of those things are really coming back to the point that you know, we've got a duty of care to our employees, so we've got to make sure that everything is perfect for when they return. It's not just about making sure that their tech works, although to be fair, that is going to be a challenge in its own right, to make sure that everybody's IT is set up correctly. If you think about the amount of effort that you put into setting up a new starter, you've got to kind of do that for everybody, I think, on their day of return. But most of all, it's about planning. It's about making sure that there's a really clear plan in place for when and how we're going to return back to the office, to make sure that there's lots of communications, lots of opportunities for people to input into the protocols of the office for how we're going to kind of work with each other, and to make sure that we're massively flexible, so that if for whatever reason, any individual or number of people potentially don't feel comfortable coming back and working in an office environment, that we accommodate that.
I think it will be interesting, Paul, because there's so much reassurance that we can do and safety measures we can put in place, and I think all of our businesses will have that. But I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly it becomes the new normal. So when we all had to wear masks to go to the supermarket for the first time, we all thought that was completely strange, and actually after a couple of trips it became the normal. So I suppose everyone's going to take their own individual time to understand and appreciate, I suppose, getting back into work. But actually I think it'll be surprisingly quick once we're back in how normal it will feel.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. But there's only so much we can control, isn't it? As employees, we can control the environment that we set up for our employees, but we can't. We've got no control over how they get to and from work, the public transport system, and the kind of the protocols that are in place there. You've also got people, not everybody's circumstances is the same. So if you're living with somebody, if you're living with elderly people or people who are vulnerable for any reason, it doesn't matter how safe we make the office or how safe the public transport system is, you're going to be, have their needs at the heart of your decision making. And so that, I think as employees, we've just got to be cognizant of all of those things.
Having said that, I mean, obviously, the majority of those people have already been vaccinated, haven't they? So I think it'll be interesting to see when the vaccination program is actually through and done, what that does to people's mental health as well, because knowing that they're 85% or 90%, covered in that respect, will make a difference, I think, moving forwards. And that's not that far off, the government having achieved that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the thing that resonated for me there is treating everyone as a new starter, and obviously that theme of flexibilities come up again, and sort of over accommodation, which seems common. The more conversations I have, the more people are saying that we need to be overly flexible and overly accommodating, because everyone's needs are going to be different. Nell, you're a mentor at Fast Forward 15. Is there anything you'd like to add on that, in terms of the customers that you serve and the mentees that you serve?
I think that I would echo a lot of what other people on the panel have said. I think that there is an element when you're looking at flexibility that you actually do look at it. So there has been a huge amount on social media, especially this month, Mental Health Awareness Month, of corporate companies, agencies, hotel groups talking about what they're doing about Mental Health Awareness Month. But as a mental health first aider myself, I also think that it shouldn't just be used as a marketing tool. And it's great to hear people saying that they're going to look at individuals' needs, but I think that's what you really need to do. So don't just use it as a marketing ploy. And to Charlotte's point, I think it's also about recognising that people's anxiety, for example, might not necessarily be about them catching COVID. It might be that they have been working in the house for a year, and that they're finding actually working anywhere else quite difficult to cope with. Equally, Paul raised a really good point that you've got some people that are in their early 20s that absolutely need to get out of their flat share and they need to be in an office, because that's impacting their mental health as well. So loads of different things that I think that we can all do, but let's be authentic. And if we say that we're going to do something, do it because you actually want to help people rather than it looks good on your website.
That's a really nice point to make. And I think, you know, we've all seen it with sustainability, inclusiveness. Some companies and some individuals genuinely take it seriously and they are authentic about it, and others sort of could be accused of jumping on the bandwagon just, you know, to be seen to be doing the right thing. And it leads me on to the next question, actually. Charlotte, I'll come to you for this one, if that's all right. Has this sort of changed as an organisation? Has this changed you in any way, this experience of the pandemic? Do you feel like it's changed the way you see mental health and the way you tackle it internally and externally?
We had quite a fleshed out mental health and wellbeing policy in the business anyhow. I think it's made me more aware of the absolute personality traits that we've got within the business, and I think it's become a lot more apparent. So I think I've been more aware of what people are able to cope with and what they're not able to cope with. I mean, I've had a bit of an interesting personal experience of the pandemic anyhow, because I had a baby in April last year. So for me, excuse me, maternity leave didn't happen. I think I took 10 days and that was it. And so it's just been, to be honest, a lot of it's been a blur. I mean, it's been kind of the decisions that have had to be made very quickly. And you go into a process of, as a business owner, kind of into survival mode, because that's essentially what it has been when you think that actually, you know, the industry is largely going to come to a close for a good 18 months, which is absolutely kind of what's happened. There's been a lot of activity in the virtual world, but you know, whether people have really been making a huge amount of money out of it is a different conversation altogether. So, you know, I think there's been a much more collaborative attitude in the industry as a result of the pandemic. And I think that's been a very positive change. I've certainly been very fortunate to be on a number of agency leading forums and conversations, and was part of One Industry, One Voice, which I thought was a very interesting initiative. And I think that's all been a very positive side to what's happened. I think it's widened communication with people within the industry and lessened the competitive element between agencies. And I think that's been very, very positive. But I think it's, you know, it has accentuated how we look at mental health and how people are handling things differently.
No, I agree 100%. It's interesting you touched on, there's a lot of sort of case studies from like World War II, World War I, where that experience of sort of collective adversity sort of brings people together. And I think that's definitely been the case in our industry, 100%. But you're right, it's an interesting time now, seeing how once we go back to normal and we're back in our teams and we're competing again, how that's all going to play out.
I think we've definitely got a new set of challenges now, which is, you know, we work in one of the most stressful industries around. So people having been working in a very isolated capacity, and certainly I'm hearing that people are really keen to get out and about again, but then, you know, being told that they need to travel potentially later on this year, how that makes people feel, not being used to that very, very high-paced quality of life that we've all been living in our industry for a very long time, where it's, you know, getting pitch work out, but running around talking to clients, getting on a plane, you know, living in a very highly stressed environment. You know, logistic teams are going to have to go back to that mentality again come September, or potentially even earlier, and how people adapt back to that after spending 15 months basically of looking at a screen. That's quite a big jump.
100%. Paul or Jenna, have you noticed any sort of changes within your teams in terms of like approaches to mental health and attitudes towards this topic at all, that you've had to sort of deal with as an organisation?
I think, if I can finish, I mean, in general, I think certainly I've been in this business for quite a long time, and I think it's now, you know, much more recognised, and I think people are much more comfortable than they ever were 5, definitely 10 years ago, talking about mental health as a really big challenge, and something that we all need to recognise and support in as many ways as we can. Obviously, there are only certain things you can do as an employer. I think in terms of, you know, really practical stuff, one of the things that the pandemic has forced all of us to do, I think probably more than we would do otherwise, is to just have the kind of the weekly checkup with the people that report into you. And I was reading something the other day about, you know, how valuable that is and how important that is. And as Nell was saying earlier, to do that genuinely, not from an employer's point of view, as, you know, how much work can I squeeze through this individual? Are they running at 110%, which is what I want? But, you know, what is there? Have they got an equitable workload? You know, have they got enough to keep them busy but not stressed? And sometimes that's a fine balance. And I think it's, you know, as a manager, it's incumbent on you to understand that and recognise when you are overloading your staff and to do something about it. I know Nell actually, you know, you did a capital a lot of stuff in terms of workforce management, but I think, you know, just general common sense and manager training is absolutely vital, because it's the managers who are looking after, you know, young kids a lot of the time in our industry, ambitious kids who maybe sometimes don't speak out early enough when they're overloaded with work, or they can't do stuff, they don't understand something. You know, there's often a fear in our business, or in any business, of people who are just scared to put their hand up and say, listen, I didn't understand that, can you go through it again? When people are reluctant to do that, that can lead to all kinds of problems further down the line. But I think, you know, for me, it's about having managers who are aware of the issues of mental health and have got the proper training as managers to recognise the symptoms and the confidence to do something about it.
I think it's not just managers managers do need to have that understanding, but it's not always a manager that a colleague would want to turn to in the first instance if they did want to discuss mental health issues. So what we've done in many of the venues across our portfolio is we've said by the end of the year we're going to have a mental health first trained person, at least one in each of our venues. And it doesn't actually have to be a manager. We've tried to encourage it to be more at a grassroots, I suppose, level, because we feel that might be the first person that they want to speak to. And many of our staff don't have English potentially as their first language. So we've tried to encourage mental health first aid trained people to sign up where they perhaps don't have English as a first language, so they can support colleagues. But I think it kind of starts from the top down, doesn't it? It's a culture. It's from the board level, it's to the managers, and then it's to the employees. And actually, it's the employees where we'll see the hub, I suppose, and the hubbub around this conversation. And that's where we need to really support them and give them the tools, I suppose, at that level.
I think Charlotte raised an interesting point. Charlotte, where you talked about, you know, the business, our industry opening back up and people going back to having been at home doing a lot of stuff virtually and then having to go from here to here really quickly. And I think it is about looking at how are we going to support people through that change, and do we need to go back to what we did, or are there more effective ways to do that? And we've all proved over the past 15, 16 months that you can have a panel session that's on a screen. You can have a customer meeting that is on a screen. And so do you need to send somebody from wherever to wherever on a train at 5 o'clock in the morning to go for a 2-hour meeting? Sometimes, yes, absolutely, because that face-to-face involvement with the client is really, really important. But sometimes it's more effective to do it from an office. It's more effective to do it virtually. So I think that is a big topic of discussion about how are we going to go from learning about the great things that we've had to learn how to do during the pandemic and putting that into practice when the world returns to some normality.
Yeah, that's a really it's a great point that you raised, Paul, and you touched on as well, Jenna, about the responsibility of managers and leaders. And I feel like sometimes it can be sort of the responsibility of everyone's mental health can be placed at the feet of the managers and the leaders in the organisation. And sometimes that can be unfair because it hasn't been a requirement in the past for us to be mentally health trained in order to go into a management or a leadership position. But now mental health's coming to the forefront a lot more. I think we need to sort of perhaps take on a bit more responsibility on that front if we can, and make sure that people in positions of influence are trained. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Taking our management hats off now, and it'd be great if you could all sort of jump in on this one if you're up for it. But I'll come to you first, Jenna, if that's all right. What are you doing personally that's perhaps different to pre-pandemic to support your own sort of physical, mental health, going back into normality?
Well, as I said at the start, in terms of team activities, I suppose we're getting involved with lots of things in terms of walking and stuff like that we wouldn't have done before. We've also had a hydration competition to try and keep people engaged, I suppose, but also again for their well-being. But I suppose personally, some of the things that I have to do is, we might have all heard of this stress bucket where you're filling it at the top and you can't let it out at the bottom. Well, I have to let it out at the bottom. And some of the ways that I suppose have been controlling that over the pandemic is through trying to eat well where I can, although the chocolate does sneak in, but trying to, I suppose, consider what I am eating and taking part in a bit more exercise, even if it's just a walk at lunchtime, or even at the end of the day if you can't fit it in during your normal hours. But those are two things that I'm going to try and keep to as we come out of the normality, is just checking on what I'm eating to really support my physical but mental health as well, because food does have an impact on your mood, and try and move a little bit more, I suppose.
Perfect. Paul, what about yourself?
I think the thing that I did early on was I kind of did a trade with myself and said, look, if I'm saving 3 hours a day on travel, what am I going to do with that extra 3 hours? And I did think, long and hard about working an extra 3 hours every day, and I reasonably quickly dismissed that. And so I basically, looked after myself. I'm looking after myself more than I have done previously. So doing a lot more exercise every day, like Jenna. The other thing I think maybe I'm a little bit more disciplined about now, certainly than I was a couple of years ago, is kind of switching off. And so the physical manifestation of that over the last few months has been, at a certain time of day, unless there's something critical going on, I will pack up the laptop and put everything away so that there's no signs that I'm using my home as a workspace. So they're two things that have really helped me, I have to say.
Brilliant, Paul. It's really healthy, mate. Anything to add, Charlotte?
I've been getting some lovely dog walks actually, which has been great. Usually first thing in the morning, like sort of 8:30 or whatever, and then kind of at the end of the day. And it's very beautiful where I am. So that's just been really good to clear my head at the beginning of the day, and also get rid of anything that's been irritating me at the end of the day. So that's been great. And if I've had time at lunchtime, I've gone for a bike ride, which has been lovely. So I guess it's been fresh air, actually, and having the ability to have fresh air that's not polluted fresh air has been really nice for me.
Air and movement.
Yeah.
And Nell?
So I could probably go on about this for hours, but and a lot of the people on the call will know this, but I left my role at Capita at the beginning of December last year out of choice. Like everybody else that's running a large agency, last year was pretty horrific. And I felt like I'd spent the 10 months making people redundant. So I chose to move roles and go and work for a charity, still incredibly involved in the industry as a Fast Forward 15 mentor, because that's really where my passion lies in helping and supporting women to succeed in our industry. But like Paul and Charlotte have mentioned, definitely over the course of the lockdown, I have refound my love of exercise, especially early in the morning. I think there is nothing better than getting out of bed, getting your kit on, going for a run or into a class. I did loads of classes on the screen as well, via Zoom, which I never thought I would enjoy, but it's that for me, movement and being outside, that's the thing that I know keeps me balanced.
It's brilliant, guys. I mean, I'm trying to resist sort of jumping in with opinions because I'm here to moderate, but I actually built a gym in lockdown, so I changed my role as well, and a couple of things that you've all said have really resonated. One was what Jenna said about a hydration competition, because the facility that we've got is built around gamifying fitness and making it competitive. And I run a CrossFit facility, and it really does get the best out of people. And I think it is a really good idea to try and introduce those things into the organisation, where you pick a healthy activity and try and make it a little bit competitive and try and make a game out of it, because it does keep people accountable, and it does sort of encourage them to make positive changes. And the other one, which I think really resonates for me, is putting my event professional hat back on, is that we rank our days in how productive they were. We get to the end of the day and we go, yeah, it was a good day because I was really productive. And I think we need to try and get more towards ranking our days in terms of how present we were. And it's really taught me this. It's been such a change of pace coming from Boulevard and running events and catering events all the time to running a gym, which is so much slower in terms of its pace. And I've had to really get used to slowing down and just trying to be present and not worrying about how many things I ticked off the to-do list. Was I there in the room with the people that I was there with? So sort of trying to switch from ranking how successful our day was in terms of productivity to ranking it in terms of how present we were is just what I wanted to add. Lastly, guys, one more question to all of you, and Paul, I'll just come back to you, if that's all right. In terms of your team and the people that you're working with and your customers, what are your expectations now of each other? What should our expectations be of each other going into this from sort of zero back to hero role? Have they changed at all? Is it again just that being flexible?
I think everybody's just got to be more aware of other people's situations and circumstances than maybe we have been previously. Yeah, it's still, we work in a brilliant industry, and it's, you know, full of people who are really passionate about what they do. But there is a tendency sometimes when you're working on a big high pressure project, you know, to all work too hard, and I think we just got to watch out for each other, really, whether it's, you know, a client or a business partner or a colleague at work, and try and, you know, raise your own awareness of the signals for when things are moving from being busy to being stressful.
Nice, thanks, Paul. Anything to add on that, Jenna?
I suppose it's just remembering we've kind of all said it throughout the pandemic that we're all in this together, and actually as we come out of the pandemic we are still all in this together, and everybody is figuring out what the new normal is and how they're going to manage the new normal. So it's just not forgetting that phrase. I suppose we are all in this together, and although it might have a different meaning now, it's still equally important. And just to remember that as we all come out of this.
What about you, Charlotte?
I think that, and this hasn't really been something that we've not always had to do, but I just think that communication is just, I think this pandemic has shown that communication is basically the root of everything. And that if you don't communicate effectively, you can't understand what people need. You can't understand where people's own boundaries lie with what they're prepared to do and what they're not prepared to do. And so I think that, you know, there has to be an internal, you know, we preach about it to our own client base, but there has to be an internal comm strategy alongside an external communication strategy. And I think more than anything else, what this pandemic has taught us is that we've started doing a lot more campaign work in general and looking at what those campaigns look like across a swathe of time, and how you continue to engage people. And, you know, because our business is engagement, that absolutely should be applying internally to our own teams and how we engage people and we keep people motivated. And, you know, for a personal perspective, rightly or wrongly, and whether or not I'm doing an effective job or not, I can see whether Lydia Hudson might be able to give me an answer, because I can see she's on this webinar. You know, I tend to think of myself as an inspirer, I guess, and somebody whose job it is to keep people motivated and enthused and excited by the journey ahead, rather than looking backwards and being concerned about what's happening or what's happened. As a business leader, so to speak, I believe that's my role, is to keep people believing in what, you know, our pathway is, and to believe in that vision.
Lovely. It's awesome, Charlotte. And Neil?
I think there's two things for me. During the pandemic, when we've all been at work, a lot of us have had children at home, and it's been absolutely acceptable to reference the fact that your child's at home and they might come in and out of the room. And I would like us to be able to keep that element of real life involved in what we're doing. I don't want us to go back to having to hide the fact that your son's just come home from school and there's about to be an enormous crash, because we've all got real lives. And then I think that also links with that authenticity point that I made before, that actually I'm in absolute awe of Charlotte, who's had a baby and is running a business during a pandemic for the events industry. It's probably lowest point ever. And think about that, the realness of how that has impacted the people that work for us. So there will be other women, other men that have been in that situation as well, that have started a family during the pandemic. There will be people that Paul alluded to, new starters that have never been in the office, and think about the impact of people that have been off furlough for all this time and how that's going to impact their career progression, rather than us just going back to all of the terrible things that we used to accept as part of our industry.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, Nell, that you've mentioned, which is the conversation around furlough, which is something we actually haven't mentioned on this call, which, you know, people who've been on furlough for, oh God, at least a year now, and what that must feel like for those people, whether they are working a few days and on furlough for the other few days, or whether they've just been on full on furlough for the whole time. You know, those people must have had a long-term fear for the fact that when furlough comes to an end, they're just not going to have a job anymore. And that anxiety must run really, really deep, and not knowing whether they can really have a conversation with their employer about that, and not being able to see their employer face to face. So, or I mean, you know, I know as an employer, having to put people on furlough and having to make redundancies in March of, making those choices at the beginning of April, 2 weeks before I gave birth. You know, it was a horrendous scenario, and some of those people are still on furlough probably, you know, for various businesses, and furlough comes to an end, I think, end of September. So how you engage them back in your industry, you know, having been on furlough for God knows how long, not really been, you probably still are engaging in the industry in some way or another, but just feel like you've not been a part of something for a very long time. That must be a really difficult position to find yourself in.
I think it's about that realness, isn't it? And actually being absolutely acknowledging how people might feel. And if we don't know how people feel, just ask them. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat as well, if we've got time, Mark.
There is. No, we do have some minutes to address those. Thanks for some great answers to that question, guys. It's interesting, the topic of expectations. A Buddhist would tell us that, you know, happiness is reality minus expectation. So you can just go, well, just lower your expectations and we'll all be happy. But, you know, when you're running a business, you can't afford to lower your expectations too much, because, you know, you don't make any money and no one gets paid. So it's a difficult one to balance, guys. So, you know, really well done there. We've got a great question from Amelia, specifically about smaller businesses. So, you know, if anyone wants to jump in on this, what advice would you give to a small organisation with only a couple of employees to put in place structures to support the mental health of colleagues and employees?
I'd love to answer that, Mark, if I can.
Go for it now, jump in.
I think from a mental health first aider perspective, there are some really great resources for smaller organisations that perhaps don't have the budget to put somebody through an accreditation. There are lots of websites, and there's some really great event specific resources as well. Eventwell, for example. And Amelia, if you want to know more than happy to have a chat with you offline as well.
I think one of the other things that's important, you know, irrespective of the size of the organisation actually, but certainly within a small organisation, is for people who work for you to feel safe, to be able to have the kind of conversations that they need to have. So I think mental safety is a big one, whether you work in a two-man band or whatever, to be able to turn around to the person who's paying your wage bill at the end of the month to say, look, I'm really not very happy, or, you know, because at the end of the day, if you understand somebody's position mentally, you're in a position as employer also to be able to do something about it and to be able to help. But if there's no communication in that area and that person doesn't feel safe to have that conversation with you, that's very difficult.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. The other one from Nikki wasn't actually a question, but it was some appreciation for a point that you made, Nell. Nikki said, as a single parent, the COVID crisis is an acceptance of real life has aided me to work flexibly from home, which was very difficult and not really acceptable before. So, you know, a small positive that's come out for Nikki. Guys, that's sort of brought us to the end of the questions. So to wrap up, I mean, I feel like you've touched on some awesome points there, and we touched on it at the start about sort of the expectations of managers and leaders, which many of you are. And I think that, you know, no one's expecting us to have all the answers when it comes to mental health. We're human beings ourselves, and all we can really do is create an environment and a culture where our employees and our teams feel supported. And that isn't always going to work either. People do have their own troubles, but the more we can do to create that environment, the better we'll be set up for success emotionally, mentally, and hopefully in terms of business as well. So well done, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll hand back over to Claire to wrap up, I guess.
Thank you very much. Thanks ever so much, Mark, and thank you, Nell, Jenna, Paul, and Charlotte. I was very impressed with all your personal conversations about running and cycling and walking, and there was not a single mention of Netflix and red wine. What's wrong with you? I think you're all pretending. So yes, that was mine. Netflix and red wine, the occasional run. Thank you all very, very much. It was really, really inspirational to hear from you all, and I think there's some wonderful tips in there about how we all step forward into this brave new world. I think it's learning where we can from the experiences of the last year and bringing them into the workforce, so that we take the good, lob out the bad, and take the new learnings with us. And hopefully when we go particularly into 2022, there will be a more sort of a realistic level that we reach. That means people are working, but with a more personal involvement that suits each individual. And I think we can all agree that that's the best way forward for everybody. So thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in real life fairly soon. And just a reminder to everybody who's on the call, this will be available to listen to again on our website, on the HBAA website, as of tomorrow afternoon. Thank you all very much, and bye for now.
Thanks, guys.